Toronto. VK on the beat. Check. I'm in Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm from Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm in Toronto like we wanna get the city love. My city love me back for my city love.
Welcome to episode 921 of Toronto Mic'd, proudly brought to you by Great Lakes Brewery, a fiercely independent craft brewery who believes in supporting communities, good times, and brewing amazing beer. Order online for free local home delivery in the GTA. Chef Drop. Access top chef and restaurant prepared meal kits shipped across the GTHA. Save 20% right now with the promo code FOTM20. McKay CEO Forums, the highest impact and least time-intensive peer group for over 1,200 CEOs, executives, and business owners around the world. StickerU.com. Create custom stickers, labels, tattoos, and decals for your home and your business. Palma Pasta. Enjoy the taste of fresh homemade Italian pasta and entrees from Palma Pasta in Mississauga and Oakville. Ridley Funeral Home, pillars of the community since 1921. And Mike Majeski of Remax Specialists Majeski Group, who's ripping up the GTA real estate scene. Learn more at realestatelove.ca. I'm Mike from TorontoMike.com, and joining me this week is author, journalist, musician, and songwriter Paul Myers. Paul, nice to meet you.
Hey, nice to meet you too.
And you're on the left coast, right? Whereabouts do we find you today?
It's closest to Berkeley, California, which is East Bay. So if you know San Francisco and you know Oakland, and just go a little bit north.
Do you ever find yourself, right off the top here, I'll hit you with the big tough questions, but do you ever find yourself missing the big smoke here, missing Toronto?
Yes, quite a lot, actually. And in the lockdown really underscored when I think I can travel now, but for the last almost 2 years, right? It's been like, even if I wanted to go home, I couldn't go home. But, we used to go about twice a year. And it's always, I have a lot of friends from the old days, and several of my family members, my brother Peter and his family, still up there. My parents passed away, but my wife's family are all up there. And, it's great. And Toronto informed me and raised me. Toronto is where I learned everything,
Well, no doubt. Your brother Mike, for example, has been very vocal and upfront about his love of Scarborough and the Toronto Maple Leafs and such. So I would imagine you grew up with a similar love for the blue and white, or with.
I was Peter Myers, my older brother, and Mike Myers and we were all Hockey Night in Canada fans, and we used to go swimming at George Vanier Collegiate in Don Mills. We used to go to on Saturday nights. We'd go swimming early and then come back for Hockey Night in Canada. I never played hockey. I played street hockey.
Sure.
In fact, we lived in a bunch of apartment buildings, and it was called the Peanut. It's an area of Don Mills Road. I don't know if they still call it the Peanut, where there's kind of the two schools are in the middle, George Vanier Collegiate and Woodbine Junior High. And I think what's used to be called Woodbine Arena, and I think it's been called the Oriole Arena or something. Anyway, I haven't been up in a while, in North York. And we used to live on this, there was like hundreds of apartment buildings that were built in the 60s. And my first paper route, my brother Peter's paper route, were in those apartment buildings. So that was, all of that Hockey Night in Canada, the Leafs, the Argos. I used to watch the Argos all the time. I used to love watching the Argos. The Grey Cup was one of my favorite things, the fact that there was almost always snow on the field in those days. Anyway, all those memories are when you mention that. Yeah, for sure.
Now, when you're playing ball hockey, was there a particular Maple Leaf you would be when you played ball hockey?
Well, this is how old I am. I think I was Daryl Sittler, even though I was obviously not that good. We used to like the Leafs of my particular youth were like Ron Ellis and Dave Keon and Norm Ullman, and and then I actually, to be honest, I became an artsy musician guy, and I stopped being as much into the hockey as my two brothers. So Peter, and we also played soccer for North York Spartans, all of us. So it was a minor soccer league in north in Yorkdale, or I mean Willowdale. Sorry.
So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start with the music, but first a couple of quick notes from fans of yours. So of course I always go on Twitter and I announce, okay, Paul Myers is coming up on Toronto Mic'd, and then you get a bunch of comments and stuff. And Elephants and Stars is the Twitter handle here, says, this will be excellent. I don't know how you know that, Elephants and Stars. It just started. We don't know it's going to be excellent, but let's find out. But back to Elephants and Stars. He was the person who introduced me to the music of Dylan Fence.
It's true.
I got to plead a little ignorance. I'm almost embarrassed to say this. Tell me, who's Dylan Fence?
Well, Dylan Fence is this band from the 90s. They were like in the same breath as around the time of Bob Mould's band Sugar or stuff like that. But they were from the Fort Apache scene, which is a scene around a studio in the East Coast of the United States, and they were just an alt rock band with kind of a Big Star kind of jangle, but lots of fuzz tone, sound a little bit like Husker Du. And I just really love this record called Outside In. And I was working with these people at Impact Magazine, and I remember just saying, you got to hear this record. And it was and all these other staffers were there, and we all, I guess I was an advocate for this band that nobody even heard of. Right. I mean, I know some people are listening who have heard of them, but you're not expected to know them. Okay. I mean,
I feel better though, because I'm sometimes, I miss the obvious, niche, and then it's like I'm haunted by this. It's like, how did I miss Dylan Fence? But you're telling me it's probably typical. No.
I think that was a very esoteric reference Elephants and Stars was making as a way of saying, hi, it's me. Because I probably only turned it on to 4 people, and that
he's one of them.
Elephants and Stars was one of them. So there you go.
Brian Dunn wrote in to say, oh, this will be a great one. See, there's high expectations, Paul, and no pressure here.
So much pressure, it's actually making me a little upset. Go ahead.
Hey, guess what? And I know the answer to this one, but I'm going to just tell you what he wrote. Hey, guess what famous Toronto band he wrote a book about? Now, I know what Brian is fishing for there. He wants to talk about Bare Naked Ladies, and I know that because I've met Brian at a couple of TMLX events. Those are Toronto Mic Listener Experience events, and Brian is like the world's biggest Bare Naked Ladies fanatic, I would say. Like, he's on the cruises and everything. He's just a diehard, and there will be some BNL talk in this episode for sure.
Yeah, I see Brian popping up on my Twitter all the time, especially when there's the subject of my long-standing relationship with all 5 of the original Bare Naked Ladies, and that includes Stephen Page. Right. And what do you want to know?
Well, I'm gonna save it for later, but we will do a little chatter. There's a lot of ground to cover here, I'll point out.
There is.
I do want to start with.
I can't even imagine where to start.
I know where I want to start because it's the Gravelberries. But here's a gateway in is Chris Ward. Now, when I saw this tweet from Chris Ward, I had that moment where I'm thinking, oh, it's Christopher Ward. He's been on the show a couple of times, but this is actually another Chris Ward. He just has the same name.
I saw that too, yeah.
So you have that moment where like, oh, Chris Ward's chiming in. And
I do know Christopher Ward, so that's even more confusing. Yes.
Right. Actually, you would know Chris Ward, of course, because the character that would be Wayne Campbell, your brother's character from Wayne's World, debuts on Christopher Ward's show.
That's right. Well, Mike, my brother Mike, let's just get that out of the way. Mike Myers, the guy. His when he was at Second City Touring Company, he was in a cast with Christopher Ward, who had been a pop songwriter and was currently at the time establishing Alana Miles' career, and they were writing all the songs that would later become Black Velvet and Alana Miles' big hit.
Right.
And then But just before that, Mike was in the Second City Touring Company with Christopher Ward, and Chris being a musician and being one of the nicest guys on the planet, we always got talking, and I always had a good time with him. In fact, when I was in the Gravelberries, I went on Christopher Ward's show when he was a Much Music VJ, and I'm sure the only reason I was on was because I knew Christopher, So, and he was always a gentleman, and I remember spending some time with him. But so Mike. I guess, was Christopher hosting City Lights or something, one of those shows, or one of those?
Yeah, exactly.
The all-night
City
show.
Limits? Was it City Limits?
Yeah.
And that was like the precursor to Much Music, and then him and JD Roberts were the first VJs on Much Music.
That's awesome Toronto stuff. So Mike came on as his character Wayne Campbell, which was based on people that we grew up with. No one specifically, but there is a Wayne Campbell, but it's not really based on him. And Mike would do that. And Christopher and him are supposed to be, I think he was supposed to be like his cousin or something like that.
Right. Something like that.
I don't know. Like, this is a Mike question, not a Paul question, but I remember watching it and thinking that was probably the first time I'd seen Mike on TV as an adult. So. And
it's funny how we got to this because Chris Ward asked a question, and it's a different Chris Ward. But anyway, so thank you for having the name Chris Ward. It led to that chat there. But Chris Ward wrote, Bowl of Globes was such a great disc. I still listen to it. Whatever happened to the band? So let's start with this. Tell us if you can, and again, I could do a whole episode on this probably, but you're going to have to be a little more succinct. But tell us about the Gravelberries. I will play a little bit of one jam people will recognize from the Gravelberries, but just tell us about like the origin story of the Gravelberries. And
okay, well, I am a musician, and when I was, all my life, I wanted to be the only thing I wanted to do was be a recording musician, writing songs, and I had several different bands over the years. Way back in the post-punk days, I was in a thing called Space Invaders. And then with Michael Philip Voyevoda, who is actually a Toronto producer of many other artists, including Bare Naked Ladies, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. But Michael and I were in this band, and then I went solo for a few years, and I had a thing called Lifetimes 9 with another member of the Space Invaders. And then, that morphed into the Paul Myers Band as a solo project. And then we changed the name to the Gravelberries. And here we are. Got the name from the Flintstones. There's an episode where Fred Flintstone's wife, Wilma, makes a Gravelberry pie. I thought Gravelberries sounds like the kind of music I play, which was melodic. So it was like berries, but it was a little bit rough with guitars. So it was a little gravelly. So I thought that was a good name for a band. The Gravelberries, recorded this record called Bowl of Globes. And the name comes from a bowl that our good friend Linda made for us, and we filled it with these patio lights that looked like little globes, the Earth, and the name comes from influenced by Robin Hitchcock's album Globe of Frogs. And I just thought, if you can use a name like Globe of Frogs, you might as well call this one Bowl of Globes. And so that's how that happened. This record, though, we made with Michael Voyevoda producing, it got airplay on CFNY and got airplay on CBC, and even on at the time CFTR, which was at the time a top 40 station similar to what Chum AM was doing. And Dan Freeman, who is Tarzan Dan, had me on the show, on his CFTR show, and we've been friends ever since, actually. And there you go. And I remember CFTR went all news or something like the week after they started playing our record.
I think 93. I want to say 93.
Yeah. So our record came out in around 92, 93. And then like we were on their playlist for about, I'd say 5 weeks before they announced they were going to all traffic and weather. And I said, the joke at the time was our next record has to be all talk so that we can stay on the air. But Dan Freeman and I are still friends. And
is he in Calgary? He's in Calgary.
He's in Calgary. And I was touring my book we'll get to this later, my book about Kids in the Hall.
Yeah.
And I was doing an interview with another station owned by the same media conglomerate, Chorus, I think it was. And I was in the lobby, and Dan Freeman walks up to me. He goes, "Tarzan Dan." I went, "Tarzan Dan, what are you doing here?" And he said, "I'm on the air in about 5 minutes. Want to come on and do a hit?" So I just walked into his control room and did like a whole promotion. And it was just one of those great things that happens when you're out in the field. But anyway, so the Gravelberries did very well in terms of what they were. We toured Canada. We went to both coasts, and I met a lot of other musicians who are still friends to this day. So it was pretty cool.
Okay, I got a bunch of questions, but one thing I'll just let the listeners know because they don't have any visuals here. But I held up, Evelyn Mako gave me that. So you remember Evelyn, by any chance, do you remember Evelyn Mako she was the news person at 680 CFTR when it was all hits.
I do remember, now that you mentioned, I needed the prompt. I knew the name, but
Dick Smythe was there as well. You probably remember Dick Smythe.
I grew up listening to Dick Smythe.
He just
I do a Dick Smythe impression. It was like, "Here's how things look to Dick Smythe." That's how he used to talk. He used to be on Chum AM.
Yeah, he was all over the place. Chum AM, he was
He
at
was a
City TV for a
newscaster.
while. He was then he was at
Yeah.
CFTR. Then CFMT was airing CFTR stuff, and he was all over the place.
That's real
Legend.
Toronto stuff for sure.
But Evelyn Macko, who I affectionately refer to as Wacko Macko, because she started on the air up north somewhere, I don't know, Aurelia or something, as Wacko Macko. But let me, that was, so what I held up for you, of course, was the old logo, 680 CFTR. That was my, I would say when I was in primary school, I would wake up to 680. Tom Rivers on 680 was my sort of morning show.
Who also started out at, I think, Chum, right?
Yes, absolutely. He was at 1050 Chum as well.
I used to collect Chum charts. That's how much of a radio geek I was.
I have so many here. I used to
Yeah.
have them right here. I know no one can see this. It's too bad, but they're somewhere in one of these drawers. But I did a whole episode on with Doug Thompson, who was there for the whole ride, basically. The history of 1050 Chum with great sound clips and everything. And he gave me all these Chum charts with Roger Ashby and John Landecker and
Terry Steele.
Right. All these. And
Mike Cooper Hogan, was it?
Oh,
Mike Cooper. Mike Cooper, yes.
Cooper, yeah.
I met Jungle J. Nelson at Simpsons at Fairview Mall.
Wow.
Yeah. And I remember he did he was doing a live hit from the Simpsons record department. And he played Horse with No Name by America, and he told us all the story, that pre-announcing. He said, this band produced by George Martin, who produced the Beatles, and this features the acoustic guitar. And it was when you're a kid,
right.
Every detail, is this going to be important? Is this going to be on the test? Is what I was thinking, and so, but yeah, so I was a huge Chum geek. I had whole friendships based on us listening to Chum. I guess it would be like having a TV show or an internet fan club of people who like the TV show Community or something. We were all
Sure.
Chum heads,
Actually, I think you had a name. You were Chum Bugs, right?
Chum Bugs. That's right. And then they broadcast from the CNE every year.
Yes.
And they'd have a little mobile studio, and I would listen. It was so mystical to me. I used to go by the Chum station on Yonge Street, and I would think that all the bands were in there, because that's where the music was coming.
Right.
Their broadcasting tower, I would look at it like a thing of beauty, like it was just a little antenna, and it was shooting to me in the suburbs with my little AM radio, and I used to listen to Brown Sugar by the Rolling Stones on
Risque.
the swings,
Wow.
and it's all coming back to me.
By the way, I love this stuff. I don't know if you've ever heard an episode of Toronto Mike before, but this is the stuff I like. So feel free to just do that.
I'm just going. Part of the reason I wanted to do it is because I was intrigued by the fact that we get to talk about Toronto, which I don't get to do enough.
Well, there'll be lots here. But that Horse of No Name, that was the song where everybody thinks it's Neil Young at first until they're told it's not Neil Young, because it sounds a lot like Neil Young.
That was by design, probably, right? Because he was definitely working on the first part of the journey.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, yeah, you don't do that by accident. I just also love that it was Plants and Birds and Rocks and Things. He kind of gave up on, he's got words for every one of the other things. Plants and birds and rocks, and you figure it out. It's like he gives up. I love songs where they bail.
Now, Gravelberries, what was the decision not to do spell berries the way you would typically pluralize berries?
Yeah, that was a quirk. I got to say that was just something I just liked it with a Y. And of course it messes people up. I can't tell you how many people get messed up by that. But by the way, there's also a thing that happens where people know I'm Mike Myers' brother, and sometimes it's a drag, sometimes it's really great, and I'm super proud of him.
Sure.
And they spell his name Myers, and then they'll spell my name Mey. But we're brothers, don't you get it? It's so weird. Anyway, so the thing about the Gravelberries with the Y, I don't know what that was about, but it's a brand name, so I figured, I don't know. I just, maybe because I saw Gravelberry Pie, and I just wanted that Y to be there for some reason.
Or it's
I didn't want it to look too much
Toronto
like the raspberries either,
Right. Sort of like the Toronto Maple Leafs in a sense, where it's not. It's because it's named after something that I think a war troop in the war or something. There's some real important reason I'm butchering right now, but Toronto Maple Leaf plural. It's not leaves. right? So it's like,
Yeah.
so maybe, I don't know, maybe you had a loophole there. I'm not sure. But I do want to play a song.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. The album was called Bowl of Globes, yeah.
Everyone, I think most of the audience is going to know this jam. I'm going to play a bit, then bring it down, and we'll talk a little more about it. And then I know the question you've probably been asked, I don't know, 100 times, but I'm going to do it again because I've never asked you. So here is a little Gravelberries for everybody.
Watching TV, listening to Little Stevie. Wonder where you are tonight. Letters I could never give her, signed, sealed, and undelivered. Wonder where you are tonight. Should I get a map of Africa or track the atlas front to back? Start my investigation just to find your new location. Wonder where you are tonight. That's right.
Wow, Paul, this is like that thing you do. Like this is that song that suddenly.
Yeah, I think it sounds great.
Oh yeah, it
I
does.
was surprised. Usually when someone says, "Here, we're going to show baby photographs," you're like, "Oh, I probably look really stupid." But Michael Voivoda did a great thing on that record. He really captured a certain energy that I thought we had, and I called it power pop at the time. It's a term I kind of like.
Sure.
Some people don't. But I was really pleased with that record, and it did actually open some doors.
So, you'll correct me if I'm wrong here, but I remember I would hear this song on CFNY. Am I remembering correctly on 102.1?
Oh yeah, CFNY was a huge supporter. They had us play one of their Canada Day mega festivals down at Ontario Place, and I think I was on their airwaves, like in person a few times. And
do you remember who you were talking to?
People.
Like, I'm hyper interested in your memories of 102.1.
I don't want to get this wrong, but I feel like it was May Potts that I talked to a lot.
Sure.
And I was following that station for long. I mean, weirdly, Alan Cross never interviewed me. I don't know if he did that sort of thing. And also Kim.
Yeah, Kim Hughes.
Kim Hughes. Well, I was blanking there. I'm about to say Karen Gordon because Karen Gordon interviewed me on CBC.
Right.
Kim Hughes, who I went on that, their street level
live in
show
Toronto
a few times. Yeah, and Dave Bookman, of course. Dave
Bookie.
Yeah. God bless. We all love Bookie.
Yeah, if you'd this might be a good time if you have any more words to share with your memories of Bookie, because it's we're still reeling from the loss in this city.
Yeah. Well, the thing about Dave is Dave Bookman was the kind of the nerd next door, and I say that with love. The guy who knew everything about the band but wanted to know about the things he didn't know, and he's your record collector friend. He just made everyone feel important, and what was unspoken was that he was just a huge advocate for art. The art of music, the art of communication, and he saw the social value in exchanging musical ideas and music itself. And my friend Dave Bedini has expressed it very clearly. He speaks a lot about Bookie. And Tim Meck, who's a guitar tech currently for Santana, but he used to be in he had a band with that the Bookman and him were in together. And so there's a lot of people I know who knew him better than me. Actually, to be honest, my first run-ins with Bookie, I remember thinking he didn't like me because he was I exalted him so much. Like, he was kind of like a Nardwuar character. Like, I don't know if you guys know that reference.
No, I do, of course, yeah.
Like the kind of guy who you think, oh, I better be on my game because I'm talking to Dave Bookman. And then, of course, he wasn't like that at all. But I mean, that's just my insecurity. I was, I'm the bad nerd. I'm the nerd who doesn't think he knows everything, and then meets the guy who knows everything, and you're like, okay, he's my god. But Bookie was just such a nice guy, and ultimately, the last few times I saw him, it's hard to believe that we're in past tense about Bookie. I know, to be honest. Last few times I saw him, it was very, very warm and very friendly, and I was very happy to see him. And by then I'd gotten over my feeling of insecurity. So yeah, I miss him being out there. You know, that's the thing that you always felt like Bookie was out there in the front lines, checking out the cool bands.
You don't just replace a guy like that, right? Like they're irreplaceable characters. Like, and they're so important, like for the fabric of a city. Like I know may have a few pangs where you're missing the Big Smoke, but Bookie was one of those guys who you kind of maybe even took for granted that this guy would just always be there. And yeah, gone way too soon. Just terribly sad that we lost Bookie.
No, I mean, you raise an interesting point. Like I'm fascinated with all scenes. Like when I read a book about the New York punk scene, or I read a book about the London scene in the 60s, and you realize that people do know each other. You know, the Susie and the Banshees people knew the Sex Pistols people, and in New York, the CBGB's crowd all knew each other. And in Toronto, we had something like that. And I'm sure there's generations now since I've left that have that thing. But there was a feeling of teamwork in the Toronto scene that I was involved in. Like I mentioned, the Rio Statics and Jason Plum and the Waltons and all these Bare Naked Ladies were friends of mine. That's how I ended up working with them. Michael Voivoda produced the Bare Naked Ladies, but he was also working with Change of Heart and all these bands. I could name off a bunch of things, but there's a world that Kurt Swinghammer, the artist and guitar player, and he's an amazing guy. Like we all knew each other. Ron Sexsmith, we all knew each other, and we would all be at each other's parties and stuff, and then end up playing on each other's records, singing back. And I sang backing vocals on several different people's records. Sometimes I don't even remember doing it. I just show up and be part of something, and that collective thing. And then there's the people who are promoting it, like Bookman, and the DJs and the people who are writing about it, like Jenny Punter used to write in the Toronto Star about these things, and the fanzines and stuff like that. It's all part of a scene. And there's photographers who took pictures of these things. And so nothing exists for it to stay in our memories. Those people have to make those contributions. Okay. So I guess I'm rambling, but that's the whole area right there.
Well, I'm going to make you ramble more, but first I'm going to play a different Canadian jam and ask you about this. And this is not yours, but maybe it is. We're going to talk about it. So here we go. This, of course, is Curious by Sandbox. And I think Sandbox might be most famous for the fact that Bubbles from Trailer Park Boys is in the band. That might be the big claim to fame for...
Yeah, Mike Smith, right?
Right, Mike Smith, absolutely.
Yeah.
Huh.
And,
okay.
What's interesting about that, people have mentioned that song. And, of course, he has I Wonder Where You Are. And I wonder where you are. It's a very similar cadence. I don't believe for a minute that they'd even heard of the Gravelberries, but I did notice just now looking on Wikipedia that record was 1995.
Yep.
And it is documented that the Gravelberries record was recorded in 1992.
Right.
I don't know. I would like to think that maybe this is a CFNY thing. Like, so maybe the fact that we got a lot of airplay on alternative radio put these ideas into people's heads. It'd be nice to think that they heard that phrase and said, I want to do that in my song. But I wouldn't be the first person in the world to have said the phrase, I wonder where you are tonight. You know, so that, I mean, I've never met this man. Many friends of mine are big fans of his. And I don't know. You'd have to ask him. I don't know if it's something you want to bring up in polite conversation, but I mean, certainly it's not a steal. If anything, it might be a mild influence, and probably subconsciously. You know. Okay.
Well, Manfred wrote me a note, and his note says, "Does he agree?" That's you, Paul. Does Paul agree? Sandbox blatantly stole the melody for I Wonder Where You Are Tonight in Curious. So Manfred, and I'll speak for myself, because who else could I speak for? Absolutely. It's too much to be just some coincidence. I think for sure that your composition "Wonder Where You Are Tonight" by the Gravelberries, which I know is yours. I believe 100% that it was borrowed for "Curious." That's my opinion.
I don't know. We'll have to ask Bubbles himself. But you know, I don't know what to say about that. I mean, yeah. But it's nice that people, in the name of defending me, think that I was ripped off. But I don't think I was. You know, they don't owe me anything.
Well, I was gonna say it's not quite My Sweet Lord. It's not quite, but
yeah. Yeah, that's the thing too. When you're making as little money as any of us probably did from these things, it's only when something becomes like sampled in a massive rap record or something that you're going to start to, everyone's going to come out looking for their $75 million payout or whatever.
That's so true. So another question from Manfred. He had a bunch of good questions. He wanted, and you've already touched on this, but I'm hoping you'll just start name dropping here and we can chat about some of them. But he says, who are some of the Toronto bands that you played with back in the day? So, like, you started doing this, and I was digging it. Like, just start name checking some more folks from the scene here.
Toronto bands. So yeah, I probably should have done some homework. So I mentioned Kurt Swinghammer. I mentioned Ron Sexsmith.
Yes.
The Grapes of Wrath were not a Toronto band, but they came through, and we played with them once.
Nice.
We also played with Ginger, who was the offshoot of them. But then I later got to know Kevin Kane as well. So those guys were contemporaries of ours. The Odds from Vancouver, still to this. In fact, I was just texting Craig from the Odds 20 minutes ago. He said he'd been on this show as well.
Yeah, he's been on this show. And he's very tight with Stephen Page as well, who will come up.
And Stephen Page, well, so what's interesting is I knew the Bare Naked Ladies. They go out on tour, and then they're recording in Vancouver. They were recording in Vancouver at, I don't know where, but they would show up at the Odds regular gig at the Roxy in Vancouver, where they would perform as Dawn Patrol. And it was their sort of cover band with fright wigs and stuff. And then Stephen, so I heard that Stephen and, well, actually all the Bare Naked Ladies had gotten along really well with the Odds. And then we started to see each other show up on and then years later, Stephen and Craig are like songwriting team, like, and they do really great work. That this trio,
and they're in that Canadian Highwaymen with Moberg.
Oh, the Trans-Canada Highwaymen. Let's talk about that.
Yes, please.
Well, this is what I was going to mention, the Pursuit of Happiness, where, okay, let me start from the top. Okay. So the Pursuit of Happiness, where when I saw them, they first moved to Toronto from Edmonton, I guess. And a friend of mine was Chris Houston, who was also known as Chris Haight. And Chris Houston was kind of doing a rockabilly act, but he was also promoting a lot of independent bands in promoting shows. And he brought them into town, I think, or promoted them at the Horseshoe. And I go to see them at the Horseshoe, and I was like, this is amazing. They were playing, because I was a huge Todd Rundgren fan, and they were playing very Todd Rundgren inspired pop rock, this is before they even were
before Love
Todd
Junk.
Rundgren.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, and I was like, okay, this is a band. I was jealous, frankly. I was like, oh my God, they're doing what I didn't have the nerve to do. And the Gravelberries were always heading that way. So I was immediately in love with the Pursuit of Happiness, and all of them were amazing people too, like Chris Abbott, everyone, Mo. By the time I saw them, I think, no, it was Johnny Sinclair and Leslie Stanwyck and then they had left the band later. But so then they ended up, I don't know how, but they ended up in our kitchen, because I was roommates with Chris Houston, and he promoted the show. So I guess he invited them over for beers. And I said, I just came from your show. You guys are great. So suddenly they're in my kitchen and we're drinking beers. Lifelong friendship, I'd say, after that. Oh. And then luckily, my manager, I was being sort of managed by Sherry Sinclair, who had been working with the Pursuit of Happiness with Jeff Rogers, and we ended up opening for the Pursuit of Happiness at all these shows around Ontario.
Wow.
And so they taught me, like Mo taught me how to play She's So Young, and it was like one of my favorite stories. So that's one thing. The Odds were this other band from Vancouver that I also got to know when we played out in Vancouver. Actually, I met them through Kevin McDonald, the Kids in the Hall.
Who's been on this show. In fact, he's the only kid who's been on this darn show, even though I've tried to get all of them, but maybe one day. But we'll get back to
he's a good guy
to
talk to about music, I'll tell you that.
Right.
So I was at a party at Kevin's house, and I met Craig, and I said, I'm going out to Vancouver. You should come see us. So we played in Vancouver at the Town Pump, and Craig came with his wife Barb, and they and Bob Kemis, who was their guitar tech at the time, and they became lifelong friends. And so then there's two bands there, and then I written the book with the Bare Naked Ladies by this point that they formed the Trans Canada Highwaymen. And then the other thing is Sloan, who came to Toronto late in my development, and I left in 97. So they had just arrived in the mid 90s, and I was such a fan of Sloan and remember feeling really jealous of them because they were younger than me and they were coming in and they were just amazing. I love Sloan to this day. I'm kind of a super fan. So then I hear that all my friends, Stephen Page, Craig Northey, Mo Berg, and Chris Murphy formed the Trans Canada Highwaymen, who I've yet to see live in person, but I've seen the videos. And just an amazing thing. These are like my favorite pop rock songwriters of Canada. And they're from my sort of alumni years, Wow. And they know it. They know it. I've told them a million times. Like I'm kind of an honorary. I wouldn't say I'm a member of the band, but I know that they know that I'm with them all the way on this pursuit.
Such a small world, eh? Like when you connect all those dots, and it's just wild.
No, I'm trying to think who else was on the scene when I was playing. So we did shows. So Sarah Harmer, who was at the time in a group called the Saddle Tramps, she was the second lead singer in that band, and she wasn't like featured yet. And she was and I can't remember if Kathleen Edwards was around at that point. I don't think she was around yet when I was still there. She came in a little bit later. So who else was there?
Was that Sarah Harmer? That's before Weeping Tile, I guess, that band, right?
It was just before Weeping Tile. Yeah. So she started Weeping just before I left. And I used to know a lot of the visiting bands too, like Spirit of the West were good friends of mine. And who else? By the way, John
can I ask
Mann,
you about? Yeah, I was gonna say
another one. Yeah.
Yeah, we lost John. Some great Canadian bands actually called it quits that year for a variety of reasons. Some very sad, but because Rush retired that year, and that was the same year that Tragically Hip had their farewell concert, and also Spirit of the West. So it was a bunch of big Canadian bands sort of called it that year. Oh, I don't mean to interrupt. If you have any words to say about John,
John. Okay, here's the thing about John Mann. John Mann was not only one of the great folk singer-songwriters in my lifetime, but also folk singer-songwriters of Canada. But he was also just a really great human. Like he was a humanist and he believed in people. He was an activist musician before there was a word for that. Right. Their song Political, it was such a great example of the social fabric that happens when you have a lot of young people who are in sort of a post-punk world, but they're also trying to work out their personal relationships as well as political relationships. And then of course that Irish influence that they brought into, but it was like an Irish, it wasn't traditional Irish. It was more like post-punk Irish. And the music that they made was always a celebration, and it was always really focused. And John he had so much potential to be more than just like I'd seen him act. He was a great actor. I think he would have written a lot more stage things, musicals and things. And when I heard he had just developed Alzheimer's disease, and my father passed away from Alzheimer's disease. So I know, it's a long, slow, it's the opposite of an Irish goodbye. Actually, it's a long, slow fading. And then, so I was in Vancouver visiting, and I think it might've been the last two shows they ever did when John could still perform. Mm-hmm. And they played The Odds Open for them, and they did. And John was reading from an iPad, but he basically, once he gets singing, he remembers, like, his music's the last thing to go. And John was great, and he was just. But I said hi to him that night, and I said I was prepared for him to not know me, and I said, John, it's Paul, and he goes, yeah, I know you. But then I wasn't sure, because you never know, because people. That's the thing about Alzheimer's. I've seen people with dementia and stuff. Like, you're trying really hard to let everyone think that you know. So I don't know if he knew who I was, but I did get to say goodbye. So that was, I didn't actually say goodbye because, that would have been too morbid, but I got a chance to sort of reconnect with him before he finally faded out completely. And very, very sad when he passed away.
Whew. Let me.
I'm such a bummer today. Sorry,
no.
I guess to know a lot of people is to also lose a lot of people, and several of my friends are still alive and doing quite well. Like, just keep that in mind.
But Paul, I would argue that there's something there's something about hearing stories like that about people who are no longer with you that almost brings them back to life for a moment. Like I personally, like I want to hear you talk about like Bookie and John Mann, and it's like just for a moment, you know, if you had Gord Downie stories, I mean, actually, I had Kevin Hearn on the program twice, but the second time we it was all about The Secret Path and him working with Gord Downie in the last couple of years of his life, and there was something therapeutic about like listening to Kevin Hearn talk to me about Gord Downie.
It's interesting you mentioned Kevin too, because Kevin poignant for several reasons. That when I first got hired to write the Bare Naked Ladies book, which was my first biography, 4 of the members contacted me, and I said, so where's Kevin? And they said, oh, he's getting some tests done. He's not feeling very well. And what I found out later was that he was about to be diagnosed with cancer. And that became the time. Yes, I knew Kevin from the Look People. You're holding up the Look People.
I know, I should tell
album.
people, yeah, because yes, I'm holding up the Look People.
Oh, well, let me go all the way back. I knew, so James B was also one of my contemporaries, and then I still see him from time to time, and we're still in touch.
Okay, I have to interfere for a moment, just ask you, because I have this debate on Toronto Mic'd all the time with people. In your opinion, is James B famous? We'll get back to that burning question in a mere moment. I just want to thank some sponsors, some partners of the program that help keep the real talk flowing. Much love to Great Lakes Brewery, fresh craft beer here in Etobicoke, southwest Toronto. Go to greatlakesbeer.com, free delivery in the GTA. Palma Pasta. Delicious Italian food. They got 4 locations, 3 in Mississauga, 1 in Oakville. Go to palmapasta.com. Stickeru.com. That's where I get my decals and my stickers, and you should do that as well. Tremendous Liberty Village-based business, but available online wherever you are in the world. Go to stickeru.com. Ridley Funeral Home. As I always say, they've been pillars of this community since 1921. Reach out to the very good people at Ridley Funeral Home. Go to ridleyfuneralhome.com. McKay CEO Forums. They have a fantastic podcast called the CEO Edge Podcast, inspiring fireside chats with executives and business leaders. Nancy McKay hosts these programs, and I urge you to subscribe and listen. If you're considering a move in the next 6 months and you're in the GTA, I strongly urge you to chat with Michael Majeski. Mike Majeski, he's been ripping up the GTA real estate scene. Go to realestatelove.ca and follow Majeski Group Homes on Instagram. He posts wonderful little videos every time he lists a home. And last but not least, this is very exciting for everyone listening to me right now in the GTHA. If you're in the GTHA, go to chefdrop.ca. Select one of the wonderful restaurants and chef-prepared meal kits there, and use the promo code FOTM20 when you check out. You'll save 20% right away. This is a very special deal. I urge all FOTMs to do this. Not only will you get to try Chef Drop, and I've been hearing from FOTMs who have had great experience and loved the meals they received from Chef Drop, but it lets Chef Drop know that you're listening and it works. So, again, the promo code is FOTM20 at chefdrop.ca. Now let's find out if Paul Myers thinks James B is famous. In your opinion, is James B famous?
I don't know about that. I don't know where he's. I don't want to offend him, but I would say he's famous the way like cult famous. Like people who know James B know him, and he you don't come away with a neutral opinion of James B. He's a very very big presence, And he was a very positive presence in my life. And one of the many things that he was a positive presence for was that he was really good at letting you know that he believed in you. And but just to bring this back to Kevin Hearn,
Sure.
Kevin was in the Look People, and then he was doing a solo record with Michael Voivoda, and then I had become a writer at this point. So I ended up writing a short 6-page bio, a short 6-page bio for Kevin Hearn, which turned out really fortuitous for me because when I got the Bare Naked Ladies book gig, Kevin was incapacitated. And as we found out, he was getting, chemo and radiation and all these things.
Right.
And I had to do all this research. And luckily I had his story already. I could talk to him, and we were, praying for him, so to speak. I mean, I don't pray, but we were like wishing him the best. And then he did pull through. So the end of my book has a happy ending. And then, so then Kevin also poignant though, because not only did he work very closely with Gord Downie and lost him to cancer, he worked closely with Lou Reed and lost Lou Reed. So you could get Kevin to talk about several of these great artists, and everyone who works with Kevin comes away with an understanding of this. Kevin's the most unique and gifted musician in that he can make his presence felt, or he can also just be a completely perfect accompanist. Like you could, you watch a Lou Reed clip where Kevin's playing the piano, and you're not really totally conscious of Kevin all the time, but then you are. Then there's a little fill or something, and he's just like Garth Hudson in the band or something. He's just sort of sitting back there, being himself and building this thing, Anyway, I love Kevin Hearn.
So perhaps we can use that as a opportunity to chat a little more about Bare Naked Ladies. First of all, what's the name of the book that you wrote about the Bare Naked Ladies?
It was called Public Stunts, Private Stories. And the reason it was called that was because at the time, the time we were doing this, their Stunt album was just cresting in the American, charts. And the single 1 week actually went to number 1. And it was an incredible time to be around the Bare Naked Ladies, having been around them earlier. I'd been with them, they opened for me at the Ultrasound Show Bar on Queen Street.
Wow.
And then they opened for us. The second time they opened for us at Sneaky D's, they brought all their own people. And it was really embarrassing because a lot of their people left during our set.
Oh.
But it was also a great thing because we were like, oh my God, next time we play with these guys, we'll be opening for them because they were coming through like a train.
Right.
So what was great to write this book was when it was happening in America. And so I got to go I embedded myself with them, met up with them at the Universal Amphitheater in Los Angeles. And then I traveled in their bus with them, and we went to Tempe, Arizona, and we went to Dallas, Austin, and Houston. And I watched, Bare Naked Lady Mania happening in the United States. Wow. And meeting these friends of theirs, fans of theirs, who are, to this day, some of those people show up in my social media because I'm associated with them. But those fans stayed with the band all the way through it. And so it's just a great thing to be a part of that. It was written for their management too, which is interesting. They hired me. So I essentially was their autobiographer. Like they made me the point person. And it was really great for me to learn how to write, but also great to be witnessing my friends making it, and it was such a great, the whole thing was a really pleasant experience. I remember Stephen Page and I in, I'm going to say Houston, we went to see Philip Seymour Hoffman movie, and we were talking about music. And he later that night, he showed me some bands like the Divine Comedy, a band from England. And I to this day, whenever I hear any of that music, was from this one bus ride where Stephen was blowing my mind because he's got such an amazing sense of music, and just he's just like I like them all. And the thing is, okay, I'm rambling now. I'm all over the place.
I love it, man.
When I did my Kids in the Hall book, I was doing promotion at CBC, so I wore my CBC Exploding Pizza shirt.
Of course.
And that night I'm up on the Danforth or on Bloor Street West, and I walk into a cafe. I still had this shirt on, and I see someone else wearing it, and it's Tyler Stewart. And Tyler and I got to thank him. I said, this is my 4th book. The Kids in the Hall book is my 4th book. And I said, you guys, it was Tyler who made the phone call to say, we want you to write our book.
Wow.
And I said, I just want to say what a poignant thing to see you. And we're both wearing CBC shirts. I mean, it was a real, like, you appreciate this on Toronto Mike. I mean, this is it was such a great Canadian moment to
So you know what I
bump
did?
into Tyler.
When my wife and I went to Italy for our anniversary, not our anniversary, for what is it? Our honeymoon. That's what it's called, the honeymoon. I should know these things. Shout out to Honeymoon Suite. But what I would do is in Europe, I would often wear my exploding. I always called it the exploding asshole, but I think exploding pizza is a much nicer one. But I would wear that shirt because it's one of these it's like when a fellow Canadian spots it. It's like, oh, there's another Canuck, and they'll come and chat you up. And I always find it when I'm in Europe, if somebody comes up to me and is like, oh yeah, we live in Calgary. It might as well be like down the street. Like it's like oh, I'm in Toronto. Like we're neighbors. Like
Yeah,
it's just,
exactly. Yeah, that happened to me. I was in my wife and I were backpacking in Nepal, and we were in Kathmandu, and we were in a cafe, and I hear somebody on the next table, is a rooftop patio thing, and the next table over, we hear them going, well, didn't he live on Bloor Street? And, like, and you hear the Bloor Street.
Right.
And Lisa and I looked at each other and like, what? And I said, you guys, are you from Toronto? And they said, yeah. And it was just like Kathmandu, of all places, you bump into another Torontonian.
You hear that? Have you ever seen photos of Joseph Bloor, the man that the Bloor is named for?
No.
Okay, well, you got to seek this out later. Just Google image or whatever. Joseph Bloor. He's a scary looking dude, man. So it's quite the photo of Joseph Bloor. So check that out. Bare Naked Ladies. Okay, so I will just cross promote really quickly that I've had 3 members, and I'm speaking of the original cast, if you will. So I'll count Stephen in there. But Stephen Page has been on. I mentioned Kevin Hearn has the 2 episodes, but I got to say, when Tyler Stewart came over, I think we might have done something like 3 hours. I can't remember now, but it was like, I know he listens to the program, so hello to Tyler. He's a big fan of Toronto Mike.
Hi, Tyler.
It's like he was made, well, you sound like you're made for this show, actually, but Tyler as well. Like, he just got it, and we started with Super Dave, and we just went. It was just unbelievable.
Yeah, he worked for Super Dave. That's amazing. He probably told you about that story about making... Baba Ganoush for Super Dave.
Well, it was I got all the Super Dave stories, and then just 2 weeks ago I had Leona Boyd on the program. And
oh my God!
And Leona drops this bomb about when I guess when Super Dave was working in Agincourt, right, filming the Super Dave show. I guess that's after Bizarre, so I guess Bizarre was there, and then anyway, and this is
Up
how
at CFTO, yeah.
Right, exactly. What's the story really quickly is that Super Dave offered Leona Boyd some television deal, but asked her to come to his hotel room. And I won't get into too many specifics, except Dave answers the door in a robe, and Leona just wanted, she said, I wouldn't tell this story while the man was alive, but she wanted to talk about some of the Me Too she experienced in her career. But yeah, so I can get in this story. Meanwhile, I love Super Dave. It's not just Super Dave, but Curb Your Enthusiasm, Bob Einstein, and of course the Tyler Stewart stories were so fantastic. But anyway, we'll leave that one. But go ahead.
You mentioned Tyler being perfect for the show, and then you were saying something about me, and I gotta say, if you've been in a 3-way conversation with me, Tyler Stewart, and maybe Stephen Page, it's kind of amazing. Stephen's a little more subdued, but he's no less participatory. But Tyler and I once went to a party. I don't drink anymore. And one of the reasons is I remember this party I went to. I ended up in my underwear pouring beers down my front. And Marin Cadell was there, as I recall. But it was, and, you know, Michael, but it was one of those Toronto parties. But I was so wasted at this party. But I remember the thing that cut through was remembering Tyler. He was the host, but remembering Tyler and I just going faster and faster and faster together.
Wow. To
this day, he's still one of my favorite people.
He's a highlight of the Toronto Mike Archives for sure. And I will just shout out Stephen Page for being a guest on Bumper Stumpers back in the day. I don't know if you know this, but Stephen Page was on Bumper Stumpers.
I don't remember that.
Pre-Bare Naked Ladies, of course, but yeah. So he goes way back there. Okay, so Bare Naked Ladies. I could do an hour of you talking about Bare Naked Ladies, but can I ask you about another Toronto band just to find out if you have anything to say about them, mainly because 2 members of the band are in my backyard tomorrow, so the timing is really nice. But did you cross paths with Lowest of the Low?
Oh, yeah. All the time. I used to see Ron and Steve. Yeah.
Steve Stanley. He's no longer in the band, though.
Yeah, but I remember years ago that was Steve Stanley. Yeah, and Ron Hawkins used to. I think his I don't know if he's still with this woman, but his partner at the time used to work at a coffee shop many years ago when I had a day job at Bloor it was a Wellesley and Young, roughly. It was around there, and I remember she said, my boyfriend's in a band, and I said, oh, who's the band? And she goes, have you ever heard of the Lowest of the Low? I'm like, well, yeah, actually, and I hadn't met him yet, so that was. And then you sort of I think we ended up on one of those CFNY bills together, with a couple other bands like Rhymes with Orange or something, like one of those.
Well, Rhymes with Orange.
But Lois and Low were probably one of my favorite bands from that whole CFNY experience.
It's almost embarrassing, but I'm not embarrassed by it. But I still routinely spin Shakespeare My Butt, like as if that's a new album. Like I just put it on because I love every song on that album. I just totally love Shakespeare My Butt.
Yeah, it's a great record. You remind me, that Shakespeare My Butt was one, and then Scott B. Sympathy's band was Scott Bradshaw. They were those bands had the same kind of, to me, poetic. They're like street poets with straight ahead rock bands,
jangly pop going on, yeah.
And it also reminds me of The Lawn, which was another band from that era with Gord Cummings on slide guitar. And of course, Ian Blurton was always around with Change of Heart and various other things that he was doing. And, Glenn Milcham drummed in one of my bands and then joined Blue Rodeo. And it was like Blue Rodeo were definitely a big part of our scene because they kind of came from outside of our scene, but they inspired our scene. Like, so I would eat at Mimi's restaurant on Bathurst and Queen. And Blue Rodeo would be there. Cowboy Junkies would be there. Right. Jane Siberry would be there.
Wow.
Sky Diggers were there.
Love Sky Diggers.
Shadowy Men on a Shadowy Planet were there.
I was going to play some, but maybe I should play it now because I wanted to talk about the kids and I have some loaded up. But yeah, amazing. Sorry to interrupt you there. When she said that, it's like, I got to load it up in the chamber here. Hey, is now a good time? Is now a good time? Maybe I play a little Shadowy Men on a Shadowy Planet, and then we can talk about, to this day, my favorite comedy troupe of all time. Here, it's my show. I'm just going to do it. Here we go. Having an average weekend. And of course, that was the theme song to The Kids in the Hall, which I watched religiously. I loved it. Tell us, what can you share with us about Kids in the Hall? And remind us what the name of your book is about Kids in the Hall.
Okay, so that sounds great, by the way. I love Shadowy Man. My book is One Dumb Guy. Well, it's called Kids in the Hall, One Dumb Guy, and it's currently available through House of Anansi. House of Anansi is a good Toronto publisher. Good plug for them. So many years ago, I knew them. I'll tell you the whole story. So when I was, because that's the show you do it on, right? So my brother Mike, as we established, was in sketch comedy. Now, when he was starting out, he was at the Second City Workshops in Toronto, which was in those days in the old fire hall building, which I don't know if even the building's still there, but I know that Second City are not. But the old fire hall had this workshop program, and you would go there and learn the rules of sketch comedy and, how to be on stage and stuff like that. Mike did really well there, as might have come out later. And he ended up in this touring company. But somewhere around this time, I took a few classes because, when you're a brother, and I was on stage as a musician, and I wanted to get better at being on stage. And also, I had been known to be slightly funny around people. So I thought, what if the sketch comedy gene could strike me too? Let's find out. And then ultimately, I think we found out it didn't. But I took about 7, I think it was about 10 weeks of courses. Like they were like 6-week courses or something like that. And I would go there, and in my class, this is what I'm getting to, or in between classes, there was Kevin McDonald and Dave Foley, who would later form the Kids in the Hall. In fact, I think they had just formed the Kids in the Hall, and they said, "Come see our sketch troupe." And then Dave Foley said to me, actually, he said, "They say I'm like your brother. They said everyone says I'm the next Mike Myers." And then Kevin was, "We love your brother. We think he's amazing." And it was like nice that they liked that. And then I was dating a woman at the time named Shirley, and Shirley used to go to York University, and she said, I want to go see this sketch troupe. My friend Scott Thompson is in them. And I said, oh, well, yeah, I've been meaning to go see the same troupe. It's my friends Scott and Dave and Kevin are in that troupe. So I went to see the Kids in the Hall at the Rivoli, and then ended up going to all their shows,
Wow.
like every time they played. And then when they got the TV show, I remember going to see the TV show tapings, several of them, not all of them. And the Shadowy Men were part of that. And it was really great. So then cut to years later, I write the Bare Naked Ladies book. I wrote another book about Long John Baldry, who's a musician from England who lived in Canada. And I then wrote a book about Todd Rundgren. And so around this time, I was like, what do I do now? And then I thought, I've been so wanting to tell the story about the Kids in the Hall. And they had just started touring again. So, I put together a book proposal, and I went to several different publishers, some American companies who were close to giving me a deal. But then House of Anansi saw what it was worth. And I thought, well, that makes sense that a Toronto publisher would do this. But they had US distribution. So it was going to be great. So I went to the Kids in the Hall and they said, I will only tell this story if you're all going to participate. And they said, yes. So I then proceeded to start interviewing them about everything, and then interviewing people who worked with them, and several people came forward, and all these A-list celebrities came forward too, like Judd Apatow, Paul Feig, and Fred Armisen, and they were all inspired in some way by the Kids in the Hall. So I wrote this book called One Dumb Guy. It did really well, and the kids themselves all helped promote it. Like, we did some live shows, Toronto, we did a thing with Scott and Bruce. LA, I did a thing with Dave, Scott, and Dave. It was Dave and Scott, actually. Yeah. And then what else? We did, we did other things. Sketchfest in San Francisco. We did 4 of them. I had done a thing in 2008 with all 5 of them. So I'm kind of like ingratiated to their world, and I know their world. And, in fact, there's another project. I'm going to be doing another project in the new year that I will announce later, but it's involving promoting the Kids in the Hall in some way. And they're, of course, making a new series, which will be out in the new year as well. So
I was going to ask you for an update on that, because it's funny, when Kevin was visited, he said that he told me off the record at the time that there was a deal in place. One member of the kids had to sign off on it still before it could be announced.
Oh, I remember that. I remember those days. Yeah.
So I got, and that was not broadcast, but I feel like we can tell that's right. But bottom line is, it happened. So I was always curious. So you're telling me this, when's it's going to air in Prime? What did you say?
There's, I don't know when their date is for their show, but Amazon Prime is putting out a new series of Kids in the Hall in 2022. Right. I'm not entirely sure. I have a date that they had said originally, but I'm pretty sure it's not that date.
I think COVID delayed it. I feel like there was something with COVID that pushed it.
Yeah. And I'm working on a project that sort of ties into it that isn't the show itself, but and that will be coming out around the same time. So that's one of the reasons we're trying to figure that out. And I'll make a lovely announcement of that at some point. But anyway, so One Dumb Guy has just gotten me all kinds of great feedback. In fact, it's it to this day, actually, people are, I have a lot better clout in the writing business, I think, because of that book. And just fans come up to me. And I must say, the Bare Naked Ladies book, also, I have fans who've said, although I'm not as... There's something I did in the Bare Naked Ladies book that I will never do again, is they encouraged me to be a character in the book. And it was my first book, and I will never do that again. And I actually did read one bad review once where somebody said, I don't want to hear about Paul Meyer's band. And it's like, I know, but I was there and I was trying to, but I won't. Yeah. But it is nice when the fans connect with a book you've written, because, I'm a fan. I write a book.
Sure. My
books are, I'm not a hard-hitting journalist. I celebrate art and the social interactions of the people who make art. And all my books, the Todd Rundgren book, which was called A Wizard, a True Star, Todd Rundgren in the Studio, it was all about how he produced, Patti Smith, XTC, Meatloaf, the New York Dolls. And I talked to all those bands that he produced as well. And it was more about stories about making the records than any kind of drug stories or anything like that, or sex stories. I mean, I'm not as interested. People are interested in that stuff, but they'll get another writer for that.
Yes, you're not there to dish the dirt. You're there to capture the spirit of the creative project, essentially.
I love that stuff. That's my favorite thing. And look at what I was saying earlier about the people I knew in Toronto. All those memories are not about that we all got wasted together. I mean, I did mention one, but but mostly the stories are about, like, I was in the room when the Rheostatics, when Michael Voivoda had just finished mixing whale music, Melville, I think it was actually, and whale music, but all these records, and I was like, and I remember thinking, you did it, Mike, and and I was proud of them, and I remember when they were recording If I Had $1 Million, and they were adding backing vocals, and I didn't get the call, but I was jealous at the time. But everybody I knew showed up to sing in the chorus on that, and wow. And just like those things, to me, it was about the spirit of the team making it and the people, and just it's not about other scandalous things,
No, totally. Now, if you don't mind, I got to tie up a loose end from earlier in this conversation, because I got to get back to the great Chris Ward, because he wanted to know what happened to the band. So can you give us the like what ended the Gravelberries?
Just a lot of things. So we toured in '94, and then it was getting harder and harder. Like, a lot of times I wasn't sharing any of the writers' royalties or anything like that, and we weren't getting paid a lot of money. So to get people to be part of the team, I think when you're a band of 5 people or 4 people who all have the same goal, it became less clear what the goal was for them. And I would often think, well, maybe we'll just get different players all the time. So it became kind of a titular thing where one lineup made the record. And then eventually I toured with one other lineup, and then there was a mid lineup somewhere in the middle. And some of the players, were in different lineups, but at some point it was just like, okay, it really isn't a band. And then it was getting harder and harder to sort of figure out what to do next. I had a crisis of confidence about being a performer, which was badly timed, I would think. And then, I did a solo. Started doing solo work, basically, and just started doing one-off shows by myself. And then, there was a meeting where I basically said, I think this isn't going to work. I think it's not. I don't think there's a band. and the 2 last men standing in the band were really great people. John Hume on keyboards and Claude Kent on drums, and it was, we'd taken it as far as we could in that lineup. And then I moved. Right. And then I moved in '97. My wife got an offer to work in Northern California for the people who make the Dummies books, ironically enough, those Computers for Dummies books.
Of course, yeah.
Which I guess are now obsolete, because people, when they get a computer now, they use usually a PDF that comes with it, so you don't need a book. But she was working for the company that did those, and so I moved to California, and that's when I started meeting other people, and then later made this record with one of the people I met, a guy named John Mormon, and we made a record under the name The Paul and John, which is I think it's the true follow-up to the Gravelberries in terms of the kinds of stuff I was writing, but it's more of a collaborative effort with John Mormon. So. But anyway, so that's how the Gravelberries ended up not being around.
Is it okay if I revisit some sadness? You okay? Maybe we had some sadness and we had some happiness, and here's a little more, just like life, right? It's all over the place here. But Michael Coffey, and I know you saw it on Twitter because I think you found out from his tweet, sadly. But I'll just read what he wrote, and then hopefully you can speak to it. But Michael Coffey wrote, can you ask him to speak about Dave Roberts? In parentheses, he says Tank, who passed on Sunday. Tank was like the gatekeeper to the whole Queen Street scene and a big part of the Garys.
Yeah. So I had heard that only online from that tweet, and Tank was somebody who was really special. He worked for the Garys, and as well as other things. I think you kind of like Gary Topp actually wrote really eloquently. I was actually looking for what Gary wrote, because he basically said that he was an honorary Gary. Gary's being Gary Cormier and Gary Top. And I imagine if you're listening to the show, you know all about these people. But
especially because they've each been on Toronto Mike, so the listenership has dove deep into the Garys for sure.
Yeah, I made a point of putting it aside, and I can't remember where I put it, but Gary Top basically said, he was a big physical presence, so people thought he was going to be like a big tough guy, but he was actually a really, really nice guy. And I didn't have as many interactions with him, so I didn't really write anything on a personal level. I just remember that he was always a really nice guy, and that to me, he was one of the people that when you think back to those days, because I was really young when the Edge Club was happening, and the Garys were really good promoters of my first band, Space Invaders. And so, I was around the Garys world, and the Garys world was very influential to a lot of us musicians in those days. And Tank was part of that. And Tank was a big part of that. And like I said earlier, it's the people that make these scenes happen. And Tank was one of them. And I was really sad to hear that I hadn't heard about his health struggles. And it's just very sad to hear about that. But I guess that's life. Especially at this age, I imagine we're going to hear more of these things.
No, I'm sorry for your loss, but just a little more sadness before we get to happier topics is because as I do the math, I realize your brother Mike is on Saturday Night Live. His last couple of years overlap with Norm Macdonald's first couple of years. And I'm curious if you had any interactions with Norm Macdonald.
Yeah, I did actually. When I first went to see Saturday Night Live, I think Norm was doing Update at this point, and I went down to New York, and Norm did the warm up, which everyone knows what a warm up is. Like, the comedian comes out before the show just to get the audience used to laughing, and also to get the microphones set for what recorded laughter would sound like. So a lot of these shows have warm-ups, and often it's somebody from the show doing stand-up. And in this case, it was Norm Macdonald, and he came out, and he was actually 3 times funnier than anything on Update, although I loved his Update. And then backstage, Mike introduced me to a lot of people that, like I met Chris Farley backstage. I met all these. And, at this point, they were colleagues of my brother. So it'd be like, Mike says, this is my brother, Paul. And then, Norm Macdonald goes, you're the brother. Yeah, you're from Toronto, right? And it was like, I don't think I even realized he was Canadian until that moment, because I hadn't really read that. And then we didn't become buddies or anything, but I remember at the time thinking that, how exciting, and I really liked his. And the other thing I remember about him on that day was, I kind of thought he was a handsome man. Like he especially at that period.
He is a handsome guy because he's got the blue piercing eyes, and
he wore nice jackets. And I remember him wearing matching, because I guess on Update you don't see the lower half, but he was wearing a matching suit jacket, and it fit him well. And I remember thinking, this guy's a suave guy. And I remember thinking that I hadn't made that impression from watching him on TV, but meeting him in person, I'm like, wow, this guy's stylish, And over the years, he obviously said a lot of things that were I didn't agree with, but he said like a million things that were hilarious. So, sure. And I think overall the balance is that he was a nice guy who wasn't afraid to say things that were sometimes challenging, And
his brother, of course, worked for the Exploding Pizza Company. Neil Macdonald worked for the CBC for many years.
I did not know that. That's why we come to Toronto Mike, to hear these details.
Yeah, that was always my fun fact. Is the guy from the Gravelberries? His brother is the guy from Shrek. Yeah. But yeah, who's related to who? So there you go. Now I'm gonna do a little mop up on some questions here, and I guess I'll apologize to you, Paul. That we're not. It's because it's Toronto Mike. I know you've been all over like Vancouver radio and Vancouver. Am I right? You've had you've been all over the airwaves in Vancouver.
Well, yeah.
Maybe
do you want the memories of Vancouver?
Sure, go, because I have a question for you about who is your favorite co-staff writer at Impact. But I don't want you to think I just skipped your like Vancouver media career.
Oh, well, just quickly, the Vancouver chunk is that it's actually kind of interesting to me, which is after being in San Francisco for about 4.5 years, I had a job that I didn't love anymore, and it was becoming hard to do from San Francisco. So I was ready to leave, and I was on a visa that meant I could only work for that company. And my wife had this similar situation. The job that she was in, she wasn't enjoying as much. So we said, let's move back to Canada, but let's try and see if we can just go up the coast to Vancouver and make that work. And by this point, I knew the odds, the Vancouver band, and I just decided to go out there. And within around this time, I had just written the Bare Naked Ladies book, so I started promoting it, and I was on some Vancouver radio station, and I said, it was Mojo Radio actually, and I was promoting my show, promoting my book on this show. I can't remember the guy's name. I'm just blanking on the guy's name. He was a Toronto broadcaster who'd moved out there. You might know. He'd been on. Oh wow. Anyway, I was guesting on the show, and then I did well. Like I was, as it turns out, a good guest, I would say. Having been on both sides of this, I could say I was probably a good guest. And then they had me back. And then I said to them, hey, I'd love to do this. You guys, it was talk radio. So I thought, let's do it. And I said, I'd love to do a show for you. And they said, well, we'll put you on in the middle of the day. They said, yes, but they said, doesn't pay that well, but you do 2 hours a day from 1 to 3. So I had the Paul Myers 1, 2, 3 show, which was midday radio show, but I got to do whatever I wanted.
Wow.
And except I couldn't play whole songs because I guess the CRTC, you couldn't play whole songs. So I play snippets of songs going into segments, and sure. I was really good at it, I thought. And then we got kind of a cult listenership, and it was rebroadcast in the middle of the night as well. So we got like some overnight drivers listening to it.
Right.
And then they moved me to I think 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock, which is getting closer to the evening. And then the station went all sports.
Oh.
And I remember the day they had me in the office and said, so on Monday we're going all sports. And I said, oh great. So am I going to interview sports guys now? And they go, oh no, you're fired.
Oh.
It was like, oh, I'd never been hired for radio before, so I'd never been fired before. Right. And I remember one of the other DJs because it was 4 chorus radio stations in one building. One of the station guys from Rock 101, I think it was, said to me, don't worry, when one doorway closes, another doorway opens. And I said, what if the window opens or something like that? It was one of those, I'd never heard these expressions. So, right. But that was cool.
I think that expression, I think it's like when God closes a door, he opens a window or something like that.
Yeah,
I feel like I heard it from Aaron Davis at some point.
Yeah, that's right. That sounds about right. But around this time concurrently, this is why this is an interesting story for me.
Of course.
I think of my 5 years in Vancouver as being a little like broadcast school, because I did that. And then while I was doing that, I was also on a show called Urban Rush on the Shaw TV Cable 10 channel. Okay. And I was the movie critic with a guy named Patrick Maliha. And we would just go to see, the idea was that I was a musician and he was a stand-up comedian, and we'd go see movies and talk about them like that. So we weren't even film critics, but we were ultimately criticizing film. That went really well. Huh. And then and then concurrently, my wife started working for the Vicky Gabbro show at CTV, which was out of Vancouver. And she was a segment producer, and they brought me in to talk pop culture with Vicky, and Vicky and I hit it off. Awesome. So I was doing 3 or 4 things. And then I was writing for the Georgia Straight, which is like their Now magazine,
owned by the same people now, by the way.
Probably. Yeah. I didn't know that.
Yeah. It just happened, I think 2 years ago, but yeah.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that. So they were, so I did that. And then I actually got a job on a show called Pop Stars The One, which was one of those, American Idol type shows.
Sure.
And I was the music judge, and Erica M was on that with me. And
wow.
It was.
Who are the other judges? Do you have any? Remember?
Who's that rapper from Toronto?
Which one? Maestro Fresh West?
Choclair.
Oh, Choclair. Okay, amazing.
Yeah. He was on that, and a comedian named Jason something. Oh my God, it's been so long. This was 2003, I think,
Jason.
But I got, what was great about that experience was that I got to go across the country staying in hotels and being part of this show that was being made. So I
Right.
got to, be in Vancouver. But I also got out to St. John's, and we didn't go to Regina, did we? Yeah, it was Regina, I think. And we went to Calgary and Montreal. So it was really great to be working in media and getting to see the country without it being in a tour bus.
For sure.
So it was really nice. So all that happened within 5 years.
Wow.
So I feel like I owe Vancouver a lot, and to this day I have friends there, and I was a slightly bigger fish in a very small pond, and I got recognized at the London Drugs, which is sort of like being recognized at Shoppers Drug Mart.
All right, Paul, I got to ask though, if you have that pop star's pedigree there, did you ever audition for Canadian Idol to be a judge on Canadian Idol?
I did not. No, I think maybe being on Popstars, the one had
disqualified you,
possibly tainted my chances for Canadian Idol. I'm not sure.
Right. Oh, because I've had actually, there's one I haven't had. A guy named Zach Werner. I think he's hiding out in Newfoundland.
I remember him.
But yeah, but Jake Gold, of course, who once again manages the Tragically Hip. Of course.
Well, Jake Gold gave me some advice once when I was in the Gravelberries. Yeah. We had a keyboard player in that band and one guitar player, and he said, "Lose the keyboard player, get a second guitar player. Guitar bands are in now." And I didn't do that. So maybe Jake was right. I remember at the time did not take it well. I said to Jake, "Okay, Jake, walk away." But people are just trying to help you in their way.
Sure. In fact, I'm pretty certain today, even though it's not a full-time gig for any members of the band or anything, but I think he manages the Pursuit of Happiness today. Like, I feel like Jake Gold somehow is managing them right now.
That would make sense. Yeah. I mean, it's at this point, we're all part of a very small brotherhood or sisterhood or whatever. There's only a few people, it wouldn't be surprised me if someday they called me to write a bio, that sort of thing, because we all know each other. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And just because they're friends of the show, did you cross paths with the Watchmen at all, or were they they were post Gravelberries? Maybe. Well, there was some overlap, I think. But did you ever cross paths?
I feel like we did a show where we were on the bill with the Watchmen, but I never really got a chance to talk to them. So no, I mean, there's a few bands like that, like Wild Tea, that we played. We played a show with. There's some bands that I knew really well, like Universal Honey was, Johnny and Leslie,
of course, from the Pursuit of Happiness,
and we did a lot of shows together. But yeah, so there's the Watchmen. I don't think. The
only reason I thought of them is because Jake was managing them too back in their heyday.
That makes sense. I remember I would see the Tea Party on the street, but I never really got to know them either. So there's a lot of those are the bands that were around, and Our Lady Peace, I think, had just started happening. Around that time. So yeah, but I didn't know those guys.
And here's a fun little just happened. So I decided I would try to find out who is this Mojo radio host. I know the Mojo Toronto people, but I didn't know the Vancouver host. I just said, I put in Google Mojo Vancouver radio host from Toronto. And the first result is like a Wikipedia blurb about Humble Howard Glassman. And the only reason I find that interesting is that Humble Howard Glassman was in my backyard yesterday with Fred. Humble and Fred were on Toronto Mike yesterday.
I love those guys. Yeah. No, Humble and Fred were good to me in Toronto's Mojo Radio and CFNY. They used to play the Gravelberries, and I actually did an event at the CN Tower that they hosted. It was like one of those CN Tower walkathons where you walk up the steps of the CN Tower. But I love those guys. And Humble and Fred were very, very, very influential to me as a broadcaster. So that was cool. Yeah, I knew those guys. Well, so this other guy's name I can't remember right now. And I suppose I should, but
okay, if it ever
I can't remember his name. I hate that. I hate that because I hope that's not a sign of aging.
No. Well, if it is, I'm in big trouble too. So that happens to me all the time, especially when the mic is live and I realize I'm not going to edit anything, and then it's like, I can't remember anything. What was I going to say? But Humble and Fred, fun fact there is that I actually produce their show now. So if you ever want to wake up at 5:15 a.m. California time, let me know and I'll put you on the show.
That's me every day. I'm just kidding. No, you know what? I will do it one day. One day I'll stay up really late.
Well, maybe if you're ever out here to visit friends, and if you're ever like on a different time zone and it's a little more convenient, just let me know and we'll make it happen. Would be awesome.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do that.
okay, so
say hi to those guys though. That's
oh,
the
I
big
will
thing.
for sure. I actually mentioned to them that I was talking to you today, and they said something about how they used to be on their show back in the day. So
I don't know the money or anything, do I? 'Cause I hate that when that happens.
well, they wouldn't forget if you did, so I don't think you do because I would have heard about it.
That's right. That's right.
All right, so the big questions: who was your favorite co-staff writer at Impact?
Well, there was a guy named Manfred that I really liked.
That's the reveal right there. That question comes from
Yeah.
some Manfred guy. So.
Yeah, and but I will also say there's two other people that I the Dickey sisters, Mary and Mary Dickey was my editor, and Robin, and they were really nice people. And I think Jenny Punter was in there a lot too. So it was a good little crew. They were out there on Queen Street, right by Trinity Bellwoods Park, in a little storefront office, and that was a very important gig for me too, because Mary Dickey hired me. I had just come in from the cold from the Gravelberries, and I had written a piece about my friend Ron Sexsmith for the Globe and Mail, and I was interested in pursuing writing. And she said, "Well, we can put you to work doing some features and reviews for Impact." And it was a glossy magazine. It was available for free. It was similar to I learned later the American magazine Tower Pulse, which was Tower Pulse was a glossy magazine that Tower Records used to put in their store. And Impact was free in record stores around the country.
I remember
Impact,
yeah.
And I got to interview Iggy Pop for Impact magazine. I got to interview Urge Overkill. It's a very interesting time, actually. Ian Menzies, who was a musician from the Toronto scene, was writing for Canadian Musician, and he had interviewed Bryan Adams, and he saw that I was writing for Impact, and he couldn't finish the article because he had to do something, but he had the interview tape. So he said, "I will recommend you to Canadian Musician magazine, and you can finish my article using my notes." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So that's how I ended up writing for Canadian Musician. So all of a sudden, Impact had given me this start, Globe and Mail had given me a start, and then I was writing for Canadian Musician. So it was suddenly I had a writing career, and that led to the Bare Naked Ladies book.
Right.
So that's how all that happened. So it's you don't know where you're going sometimes in life, and sometimes you just have to listen for what the universe is telling you. So that worked out for me.
Well, one more from Manfred here, and he wants to know, how did you come to meet BJ Horseman?
Oh, Raphael Ben Wexford. Excuse me. What's his name?
Raphael Bob Waxberg. Yeah.
Bob, I said Ben. Okay. Well, Raphael Bob Waxberg, I only got to meet him because living in San Francisco and being somewhat connected to some media here, I've hosted various live shows like Q&As, and
Sure.
I've been like the featured interviewer for different shows for Sketchfest and things like that. And this Jewish Community Center, we're bringing him in. And they asked me if I would host it. So I read his book ahead of time, because that was to promote his book. And I watched about 2 seasons of BoJack Horseman, and then really just went to the thing with open mind. And in the green room, we were talking about other things, and it turns out like one of the stories was about Bare Naked Ladies, and I said, "Well, I wrote their book," and we hit it off. But so by the time we went on stage. And I think it's available online somewhere. You can search it out. Paul Myers, Myers, with Raphael Bob Waxberg. I'll say it wrong. And I felt like we had a great chemistry on stage. And he told me some great stories. And I love the guy. I haven't really seen him since. We sometimes pop into each other in Twitter. Twitter's a stream of
Sure.
goodness and badness, and sometimes the good is really good and the bad is really bad. So
Agreed. And one more BNL question from Brian that I missed. I just want to get it because he'll be mad at me if I don't get this in. I'm curious to hear more stories of when he was in the recording studio when BNL recorded Maroon.
Yeah, well, that was fascinating. So this is the album after
Maybe You Should Drive? No, where am I?
No, Maroon. I wasn't there for Maroon. Wait a minute. It was the album after. It was called, was Maroon? No, it was the one that with 1 week on it.
That's, here, I'm going to call up the BNL discography here.
Yeah.
We got to get this right, especially since you're the authority here. Come here. All right, so, Stunt was 1998.
Oh, that's right. So Stunt. So I was, just as Stunt was coming out, they asked me to write this book. So I was spending a lot of time with them.
Right.
The book took a little while to get together. There's various things happening. I think also because it was my first book, I was taking a long time to turn it in.
Right.
And there hadn't been a real deadline. I mean, there hadn't been. I needed something to finish the book. So they said, well, we're already recording a new album, which would become Maroon. So I was flown down to LA Cello Studios, which had a lot of history, because I think the Beach Boys had recorded some of Pet Sounds there when it was called something else. Wow. And they were recording with Don Was, of Was Not Was, and and it was, so I was present for about 3 or 4 of these sessions. And this one particular day I came down, and they were doing Feels Just was like falling for the first time.
Yes.
And there was a part of it, we were all listening back to the playback, and it reminded me of the Who for some reason. I don't know why. And I started pretending to swing the microphone like Roger Daltrey. And so everybody started imitating me, and we all did it. And I remember being so happy for them that they had, like, they played me Pinch Me, and I thought it sounded great because it had these sampled drums, which is little loop and stuff. And Don Was and I had a great conversation about the role of comedy in music, and it's all in the book. And then I remember a year after this, so that tells you about the Roger Daltrey mic thing. So a year or two after this, they're playing in Vancouver, and GM Place, I don't know what it's called now, but GM Place, and
Rogers Center, maybe,
and I'm in the VIP rows where all their friends got tickets, and they were singing that song, and I started doing the swinging above my head, pretending it'd be Roger Daltrey, and Ed Robertson just started laughing, and I think he pointed over to Stephen Page, like check out Paul's doing that thing, and it sort of became our little in joke. I mean, it was, but I just loved being in that room with them at that point when they were now recording their follow-up to their big hit album, and they were in Los Angeles, recording in some of the most storied rooms, knowing what Barenaked Ladies, what Beach Boys had meant to Stephen specifically, having written Brian Wilson. And I don't know if you know that, but around this, Brian Wilson had started doing the song Brian Wilson. And so he was invited to come over by Don Was, who had worked with Brian Wilson. And I wasn't there for this, but apparently, Brian popped his head in and listened to the music, and gave them some advice, which was don't eat too much, which I think that's an amazing story in itself, but that's Stephen's story. He may have told you.
Don't eat too much is that's like the opposite advice that you'd receive. Enjoy every sandwich. No, yeah, enjoy every sandwich.
Yes, it is. Yeah. His is enjoy every sandwich, but don't eat so many of them. Yeah. So
right, exact opposite.
The Zevon.
Yeah, Warren Zevon, of course. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. I mean,
yeah. So I don't know if I have any more stories like that, but I remember they were at the corner of what was it? Sunset and what's Gordon? It was Gordon Avenue. So it was Sunset and Gordon was where the studio was, and Gordon being their first album title.
Of course.
I remember thinking, I made a lot of that in my mind. I remember standing with Stephen and saying, do you realize this is Gordon Street? You guys have come all the way back to Gordon. And, when you're in a certain frame of mind, that seemed like a big deal to me.
It all comes full circle here. All right, final questions, my friend. You've done fantastic. In fact, at some point, you got to return to Kick Out the Jams because you were just perfect match for Toronto Mike here.
Well, thanks.
Okay, anything you can... Oh, glad to hear that. Anything you can tell us about the very special project you're shooting in London with Mike from Scarborough? Actually, I call him Scarborough Mike. That is, of course, your brother, Mike Myers. What can you tell us about this?
Well, I can tell you that I think it's pretty common knowledge to people who've been following me on social media. I've said this much, which is my brother is making a 6-episode Netflix series that's going to be out in the new year. I don't know exactly when, because things have to be edited, and there's all sorts of bureaucracy with Netflix and international dubbing and all that stuff that they do. But they're delivering it this year to be out midway through next year. And it's Mike plays several characters, and a lot of them wearing prosthetic makeup, so he looks completely different.
Sure.
And there's also Keegan-Michael Key, Ken Jeong, Jennifer Saunders, Debbie Mazar, a bunch of other people are involved. And I was involved in a very unique role, which was I've only ever done this once for Mike. I doubled for him. But because he's wearing so much prosthetic makeup, it was actually pretty easy. I look a little like him,
Sure you
but
do.
not really. If you put us close together, we don't look identical. But if he's already wearing makeup to look a certain way, and they can put that makeup on me, so I would do scenes where there's going to be computer enhanced versions of him acting against himself, but for the long shots, they might have a shot of me if I'm not saying anything, walking into the frame as Mike.
Interesting.
Or standing handing a telephone to Mike or something like that, and which necessitated me being there for 3 months in England when they filmed this thing under incredible COVID protocols.
Sure.
It was one of those things where everyone's wearing masks the whole time, and we're COVID tested every day, and we're in a bubble. And but it was great to be. I got to walk around in London after the quarantine, but I didn't go into any crowded buildings or anything. But it was just really great to be with my brother at this time in his career, because we're grown-ups now, and I can just really, enjoy this moment of spending basically a whole summer with him, and just also the unique experience of being inside a whole production from beginning to end, and getting to sort of essentially act with Keegan-Michael Key and Ken Jeong, and who are all super nice people, by the way. Both Ken and Keegan, I could be friends with them. They're just such amazing people. So it was really, really fun, and that'll come out. I think, the name is the Pentaverate. I think they've announced that much, and it's a word that people are probably going to stumble over, but it's like, think of Pentagon,
Sure.
and Pentaverate, but like it looks like Pentaverate, but it's Pentaverate, with the accent on Taverate.
Is it too late to change that title? I need to know.
No.
We might need to change that.
I think it is not too late, actually. No, but I'm sure because it's about an organization called the Pentaverate, which many Mike Myers fans will recognize the lineage of that, but I'll let them figure that out. So that's as much as I can say. I can't really tell much about the storyline or anything like that, because that would be a spoiler.
Sure,
and that would also be.
We don't want that anyways, because we're all gonna.
I'm only telling you things that are available on public sources already. It's been announced in Variety. So
in the same spirit of teasers, if you will, what can you tell us about your new John Candy book?
Well, I delayed it a little bit because I had to do this Pentaverate thing, but I've been interviewing people like Catherine O'Hara, Dave Thomas, Joe Flaherty, as well as filmmakers, Chris Columbus and people like that, and Steve Martin Short. And it's just about the life and work of John Candy, who was one of the greats, who inspired people like my brother as well, but also inspired a whole generation of SCTV, and then later with Uncle Buck and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and was taken, again, that's the theme in our show, but was taken far too young in his early 40s in 1994. He was born on Halloween, which is interesting because everyone loves candy on Halloween. And it's been a real great honor to walk through his life, talking to a lot of people you haven't heard of, who were behind the scenes, as well as many people you have heard of. And I don't take this test lightly. I want it to be a very respectful and celebratory look at this person's life and career and how they affected all these people. And it's kind of the follow-up to my Kids in the Hall book, One Dumb Guy. So in the sense that, it's me writing about comedy again. I tend to write about rock and roll. And I think comedy has been as big a part of my life as anything, even though I'm not a comedian. So for me to pay respects to John Candy in this way, a good son of Toronto. So, or Newmarket, if you want to get specific. But he grew up in Toronto. He worked at the Don Lenz Theater as a kid, So
we claim them as ours for sure. But it's funny, we talked about a small world that we live in here, but earlier I referenced an episode of Toronto Mic'd, which was a deep dive into 1050 Chum, the history of 1050 Chum as a top 40 radio station. And the gentleman who walked us through it with the clips is named Doug Thompson. As you talk about John Candy, I remember, Doug in his stories was super tight with John Candy. Like they did a bunch of stuff together, and they were super close. It's just such a small world that we referenced Doug earlier talking 1050 and.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. Well, yeah, I mean, there's so many connections. Paul Woods just wrote a book about the Toronto Argonauts, and you know, when Candy owned the Argos, but Paul Woods comes in his book from a whole sports story angle. So I talked to him about talking about John, and he also shared some information with me that really helped me. But like, I never would have met him. But then Brett Gallagher worked with the Argos and with John Candy, and I ended up interviewing like Bob Crane, who is the son of Hogan's Heroes, Bob Crane, but he was John Candy. Bob Crane Jr. was John Candy's assistant towards the end of his life, you know, and just what an honor to talk to all these people whose lives were changed and affected in positive ways by John Candy. So
see if you can find out from Martin Scorsese the status of his SCTV documentary that we were.
Okay, I'll get right on that
because we were teased with that, and I know they had the reunion at the Winter Elgin Garden Theater here, but where the heck is that? So if you just take a note to talk to Marty about.
I'll put that in my thing when I get through to Marty. As you know, I have him on speed dial.
All right, and 3 more. I think I said an hour, and I've totally stolen more because
it's okay. It's a Toronto hour. A Toronto hour is anytime you want it.
That's right, Johnny O. And this, I don't understand this question, so I apologize if this is offensive in any way. I'm just going to read it, but I know Johnny O.
Maybe I won't understand it, but go ahead.
I have met the man at a TMLX event, so I feel like that's enough vetting. But my question for Paul: don't you think his argument for not reuniting with Talking Heads because it'd just be a nostalgia trip? Not breaking new ground, that's in air quotes there, is a tad lame since he just plays TH songs with everyone but TH these days?
I presume he's talking about David Byrne here. I'm friends with Chris France and Tina Weymouth from Talking Heads, and I've done 2 different panel programs and had dinner with David Byrne. I am not going to get in the middle of that argument, but I will tell you this: that right. It is duly noted that Talking Head songs feature prominently in American Utopia, and that the Tonys. I don't know if he made any acknowledgement of that. I know that there's a lot of, you know, I talk about Talking Heads on a whole other podcast, which I could plug.
Well, that's actually my next question is maybe
Rando
segue
Cast
right
with
over
Brendan Smith. Yeah.
Okay, Rando, because I was going to ask you about Record Store Day, but tell me about.
We should talk about my podcast for sure.
Yeah, tell us, because what you're speaking to now are people who are podcast friendly. They figured out how to listen to a podcast, so you're now fishing where the fish are. Tell us why we should all just pause this program and subscribe to Record Store Day podcast.
The Record Store Day podcast with Paul Myers is it's a bi-weekly show sponsored by the people who put on the actual Record Store Day, which you've heard of. And we also have some other sponsors. But what I try to do on that show is talk to people who make records, sometimes people who sell records or produce records. Sometimes I talk to record company people. And it's stories about how records affect your life. And it's very music forward conversation. We don't speak in terms of sales graphs and things like that. We talk about what, again, like I said, the social interactions and personal stories behind people who are involved in recorded music. Physical product is what we like to talk about because it's that's their purview at Record Store Day. Is they want to keep people coming to record stores, and they're doing a damn good job at that. If you saw that the vinyl numbers are higher than CD numbers again.
Wow.
So we've had people like Elvis Costello, sometimes some of my friends from Toronto like Ron Sexsmith and Stephen Page have been on the show. Jay Ferguson from Sloan's been on the show. We've had Susanna Hoffs of the Bangles, Jane Wiedlin of the Go-Go's, the Black Pumas have been on the show. I'm trying to think of other artists recently. Well, we have emerging artists and not emerging artists. We had Miles Copeland from IRS Records telling the whole story of managing the Police and launching the careers of Squeeze and the Go-Go's. And we had Daniel Lanois on talking about working with Peter Gabriel and Brian Eno. So the Record Store Day podcast is available on all platforms. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, as they say. You follow me at Pull My Ears on Twitter and PULMYERS, and I will usually be promoting the Record Store Day podcast every second day because we're trying to just increase our visibility. I've been doing 51 episodes so far. and I'm only just getting started. So I'm really excited about it.
Those are some great guests, and I think I would listen to a podcast just to hear you, talk. So the fact you have these great, you know what I mean? So you could fly solo.
One thing I'm learning
but
one thing I'm learning to do on my own podcast is to not talk so damn much, because when I'm a guest, you'll hear this guy. But one of the things I like to do now is just you'll sometimes hear me going,
Well, that is the hardest part, right? Is to shut up and listen, which I just did a poor job right there of doing. But shut up and get out of the way.
I'm on both sides of this gig. I know exactly what it's like. So maybe I'm trying to also give you what they call good guest. I'm trying to give you good guest here.
Well, you did it honestly, Paul. You gave me good guest. This was great, and I'm so glad we finally could get this done. I know it almost happened and it didn't happen, and then it went on the back burner for COVID, it seems. But dude, you knocked it out of the park. I really love this.
Well, thank you. And thanks for having me, and thanks for staying with me. And give my love to Toronto. It's still my hometown no matter what.
Oh, you just did it, buddy. I don't even have to now. You just did it. Hey, last question is, would your brother Mike ever appear on Toronto Mic'd?
No fucking way. No, I'm just kidding. The real answer is don't ask me.
You're the closest I can get, so okay. But my friend, that brings us to the end of our 921st show. You can follow... Yay! 921, round number. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Toronto Mike. As Paul just mentioned, it's Pull My Ears, but spell pull with one L. Okay, so PULMYEARS. That's him on Twitter. Follow him. He's a good follow. Our friends at Great Lakes Brewery are at Great Lakes Beer. Chef Drop is at Get Chef Drop. McKay CEO Forums, they're at McKay CEO Forums. Palma Pasta is at Palma Pasta. Sticker U is at Sticker U. Ridley Funeral Home, they're at Ridley FH. And Mike Majeski of Remax Specialists Majeski Group, he's at Majeski Group Homes on Instagram. See you all tomorrow. It's actually a double header. I got Greg Brady in the morning and then Lowest of the Low in the afternoon.
This podcast has been produced by TMDS and accelerated by Roam Phone. Roam Phone brings you the most reliable virtual phone service to run your business and protect your home number from unwanted calls. Visit roamphone.ca to get started.